It was a bitter morning in late October, and the wind bit through coats like knives. In the heart of a small Illinois town, tucked quietly between the county courthouse and a rusted bus stop, sat an old wooden bench. It had splinters sticking from its arms and paint peeling from decades of wear. And on that bench, like she did nearly every morning, sat Maggie Ross. Her back was straight, eyes fixed on the sidewalk ahead, but her expression was unreadable. Calm, maybe distant, maybe somewhere far beyond what the morning crowd could imagine. She wore a coat, a military-style jacket, weathered and oversized, its olive color faded almost to gray. The right sleeve was frayed, and the collar had been stitched and restitched more times than anyone could count. To most, it looked like something picked up from a second-hand shop, but to her, it was armor. Maggie said nothing. She hardly ever did. Each morning, she sat still for hours, as if waiting for someone. She had no phone, no coffee cup, no book. Just her coat, a small cloth bag at her feet, and a look in her eyes that made strangers either pity her or avoid her. This morning, though, she wasn't ignored. Three young police officers, just finishing a night shift, walked down the sidewalk toward the station. They were laughing, not out of cruelty, just the kind of sleepy, half-hyper chatter people get when they're running on caffeine and no sleep. One of them, Officer Blake, a rookie with a sarcastic streak and a habit of speaking before thinking, slowed his step when he saw her. "Hey, fellas," he said, smirking. "Check out the war hero." Maggie didn't move. She'd heard it before. People questioning, doubting, mocking. She was used to it. "What, did she crawl out of a bunker?" said Officer Ryan, elbowing Blake. Blake leaned toward her, pretending to squint at the patch on her shoulder, a faded black insignia shaped like an eagle, wings spread, talons clutching two lightning bolts. "What even is that thing? Some discount Rambo patch?" The third officer, Jennings, chuckled nervously but said nothing. He watched Maggie's face carefully. Something about her posture felt deliberate, controlled, not like a lost woman, but more like someone waiting. Blake stepped closer. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, mockingly polite. "You need help finding your way back to the nursing home? Or the VFW?" Still, Maggie didn't answer. Her eyes flicked briefly toward him. Cool, assessing, and returned to the sidewalk ahead. "Come on, Blake," Jennings muttered. "Let's go. She's just sitting." Blake threw up his hands. "Hey, just trying to be a good citizen," he joked. But as he turned away, he added one last jab. "Bet that coat's older than all of us." As they walked off toward the station, Maggie finally reached into her coat pocket. Her fingers closed around a small, worn photo. She held it in her lap and stared down at it. It was black and white, creased in the corners, showing a group of 9 men and women in desert camo, smiling beside a black helicopter under a foreign sun. She was in the center, younger, stronger. The patch on her sleeve in that photo was crisp and clear. Her thumb grazed across one of the faces, the man beside her. Eyes like fire. Gone now. The cops didn't know. They couldn't have known. That coat had been through firefights and desert storms. The patch on her shoulder had been sewn into her uniform by hand in a remote base across the world. She had earned it through sweat, blood, and a mission that had never made it into the news. She looked up again as a child ran past, chasing a balloon. A woman followed, calling after him with a tired voice. The town had changed since she last walked its streets as Margaret Ross, daughter of a mechanic, high school track star, U.S. Army enlistee at 17. That girl had vanished 30 years ago. In her place was this quiet figure on a splintered bench, forgotten by time. But things were about to change. What Officer Blake didn't know was that his mocking comment A joke thrown into the wind had been overheard by a patrol sergeant passing on the other side of the street. The sergeant, a former Marine, hadn't seen the patch clearly, but something in the shape triggered a memory he couldn't quite place. He would mention it later back at the station, casually, curiously, and when a desk officer looked it up and found no results in the system, the curiosity would grow. Files would be opened. Phone calls would be made. A name would surface, a name tied to an old operation buried so deep, most believed it was myth. And far from the station. At a private residence 20 minutes away, a retired general named Marcus Weller would receive an unexpected call. "What did you say was on her shoulder?" He'd ask. When he heard the answer, he would rise to his feet, stunned. Because the last time he saw Captain Margaret Ross, she had disappeared into a sandstorm. A silent radio transmission, her final sign-off. She wasn't supposed to be alive. And now, apparently, she was sitting on a bench in his own town, wrapped in the past everyone had tried to forget. A day passed slowly at the station. Officer Blake leaned back in his chair, sipping lukewarm coffee as he recounted his encounter with the mystery woman in the ragged jacket. He mimicked her blank stare, exaggerated her silence, and cracked. "Another joke. I swear, she looked like she hadn't blinked in a year. Thought she was going to vaporize me with her eyes." A few officers chuckled, but Sergeant Davis, a thick-necked, grizzled vet nearing retirement, didn't laugh. He'd heard Blake's earlier comments in passing, and now approached with a furrowed brow. "You said she was wearing some kind of patch?" he asked. Blake shrugged. "Yeah, like an eagle holding lightning bolts or something. Probably a knockoff." Looked all faded. Sergeant Davis suddenly straightened. His fingers tapped slowly on the desk. "Which shoulder?" "Right shoulder," Blake replied, looking puzzled now. "Why?" Davis didn't answer. He walked away, muttering to himself. Something about that description tugged at a corner of his memory. Something old. Something sealed under silence and dusty files. He went straight to the archives room, pulling a battered binder labeled Discontinued Units and Special Clearance Files. It hadn't been touched in years. Flipping through pages, his eyes scanned past old insignias, Airborne, Ranger, Delta, until he stopped on a black and white image. An eagle with outstretched wings and lightning bolts gripped in each claw. Beneath it was a name he hadn't heard in decades. Ghost Eagle Recon Unit, status, classified. He froze. He remembered whispers of the unit during his early years in the Marines. Not much, just fragments, second-hand rumors from other operators who spoke low and drank heavily. Ghost Eagle was the nickname. They were a deep recon and intelligence extraction squad in the Gulf. Officially, they didn't exist. Then one day, they vanished. Operation classified. Personnel presumed dead. All mentions were scrubbed clean. He closed the binder carefully and returned to his desk. "Dawson," he called to the tech on duty. "Pull footage from the park security. Cam near bench 3 this morning. 8 to 10 a.m. Within minutes, a grainy image popped up on the screen. There she was, sitting tall, shoulders squared despite the oversized coat. The image zoomed in on her right shoulder, and though the footage was low res, the shape of the patch was unmistakable. Davis stood up and walked straight to the captain's office. 2 hours later, the photo and description were forwarded discreetly to a contact at the U.S. Army Archives Department, and from there it landed in a far more restricted inbox, one belonging to General Marcus Weller, retired, living in quiet seclusion just outside Rockford. The email came in with a neutral subject line: Old Patch Inquiry, possible Ghost Eagle insignia sighting. At first, Weller almost deleted it, but the image preview stopped him cold. He clicked, enlarged, and leaned in. The black stitching on the patch may have faded, but the shape hadn't changed. It was theirs. Ghost Eagle. He dropped his glass. No. He whispered. That's not possible. He hadn't seen that insignia in 31 years. Not since the day he was forced to sign off the final report. Operation Echo HAWK status. Failure. All personnel presumed Kier. 9 soldiers had gone in. None came out. Or so they thought. Weller sank into his chair, staring at the woman in the photo. Even in low resolution, he recognized the high cheekbones, the firm posture, the way she gripped her knees with tension. It was her. It had to be Captain Margaret Ross. She had been the youngest officer in the unit, but the sharpest. Fluent in Arabic, a specialist in intelligence recovery, and trained in both psychological warfare and hand-to-hand combat. Her record was spotless. Her unit adored her. Weller had handpicked her for Echo Hawk. She had disappeared in the storm, quite literally. During the extraction, a sudden desert sandstorm forced their helicopters to fall back. Radio contact with Ghost. Eagle went dead. Recon found signs of a firefight. Blood, burned-out vehicles, but no bodies. After weeks of searching and cover-ups, the military called it killed in action. No remains recovered. But here she was. Alive, Dot. He rose fast. Dialed an old number. Colonel Hayes, this is Weller. I need a transport now. Back at the precinct, Officer Blake was still amused by the morning's events, but now Jennings wasn't laughing. Blake, he said, watching the senior officers move back and forth in tight whispers, I think you should stop talking about her. What? Why? I don't think she's just some crazy old lady. Blake scoffed. She's sitting in a park all day, talking to no one, wearing army gear from the Cold War. Jennings leaned closer. Exactly. And have you ever seen an old lady scare 3 brass officers into going dead quiet? Just then, Davis stepped out, face pale. Blake, Jennings, with me. The air changed Dot as they walked down the corridor. Blake's grin slowly faded. Who is she? He finally asked. Davis didn't stop walking. If we're right, she's someone the government spent 30 years forgetting. The precinct hadn't been this tense in years. Officers moved with a strange, quiet urgency, glancing toward the back office where Sergeant Davis, Captain Reynolds, and a pair of government suits had sealed themselves inside. The air was thick, every keyboard stroke and phone ring sounding louder than usual. Outside, rain had started to fall lightly, misting the sidewalks and painting the world in gray. Officer Blake sat stiffly at his desk. His earlier bravado was gone, replaced with restless tapping and the occasional glance toward Jennings, who hadn't spoken a word since their meeting with Davis. The sergeant hadn't yelled or lectured. He had simply shown them the binder with the Ghost Eagle patch and said, "What you saw this morning was bigger than you'll ever understand. And for now, you will not speak of it to anyone." Jennings had nodded. Blake had tried to laugh, but even he felt his throat tighten. Meanwhile, across town, General Marcus Weller stepped out of the black SUV that pulled up outside the park. He was wearing a civilian overcoat, but his presence screamed command. His eyes scanned the area methodically. His assistant, Colonel Hayes, stepped beside him. "She's here most mornings," Hayes said. "Same bench. Doesn't talk much." Weller nodded once. He wasn't here for a reunion. He was here for confirmation. If that woman was who he thought she was, it meant that the truth, buried so deep for 3 decades, was about to rise again. Back at the Army Intelligence Archives, alarms had quietly begun to ring, not the kind that triggered sirens, but the silent kind that pinged in top security servers. The name Margaret Ross had been flagged, and not just in one database. Her identity was marked deceased, status redacted. Her mission file, Echo Hawk, was sealed under triple classification, accessible only by former commanding officers, and a handful of trusted intelligence clerks. But someone had accessed it. Deep within a basement at Fort Bragg, a man named Dr. Felix Ward, a retired analyst and war historian, had received an urgent email that morning containing the blurry park photo and a short message. "Can you confirm the identity of this woman?" Ward had served as the final debriefer for Ghost Eagle before their final mission. His hand had signed the closure report that declared them all. Kia. Seeing the photo now was like seeing a ghost. He opened the digital folder labeled GE Unit 9. Echo Hawk, hesitating only a moment before unlocking it. Captain Margaret Ross was the final file. Photo ID, age 28, last updated March 1993. Awards: Silver Star, Joint Service Commendation Medal, Army Intelligence Excellence Cross. Known aliases: classified, specialist in infiltration, foreign intelligence extraction, and counter-operative manipulation. Known to speak 5 languages. Psychological profile: stable, high intellect, loyalty rating 98%. The last entry: mission log, ECO HAWK, status, active. Deployment, Middle East. Objective, unconfirmed. Last contact, March 14, 1993, 05:00 hours. Declared MIA, presumed KIA, March 23, 1993, debriefing incomplete. Remains unrecovered. Operation sealed indefinitely. Ward leaned back in his chair. "You survived," he whispered. "Where have you been?" Back in the park, Maggie Ross sat in the light drizzle, unmoved by the weather. Her jacket had seen worse, far worse. Her hands, though frail, held strength. Her breathing was slow, deliberate. She was aware of the men watching her from across the street. She could feel it, that old instinct, unshaken by time. Her training was still intact. When General Weller finally approached, he didn't come in uniform, nor did he announce himself. He simply walked quietly, like an old soldier visiting a battlefield. He stopped 5 feet from her. "Captain Ross?" Maggie turned her head slowly. For a moment, they said nothing. Weller saw recognition bloom in her eyes. Tired, yes, but unmistakably sharp. "You're alive," he said, voice tight. "I was never dead," she replied. Weller's throat clenched. "We searched for weeks. They told us the storm buried the site. No bodies, no signals. We had to declare." Maggie nodded once. "They wanted it buried." The silence stretched between them. "I came home," she said after a moment. "But not the same way I left." Weller's voice softened. "What happened out there?" Her gaze drifted toward the street, as if watching ghosts. "They cut the signal. We weren't supposed to survive. It wasn't an op. It was a cleanup." Weller's fists clenched. He'd always suspected something was wrong, but even he didn't know the full extent of what happened. He knelt beside her, quietly. "You've been off the grid ever since?" Maggie looked at him, a slight tremble in her voice. "I didn't know who I was anymore, but I kept the jacket. I kept the patch." He nodded. "You'll never be forgotten." Again, not after this. Behind them, a crowd was slowly forming. Someone was filming on their phone. Another whispered, "Who is she?" But Weller blocked them with his broad frame. Maggie deserved more than gawking. She deserved honor. Back at the station, Officer Blake stood near the monitor, watching the live park feed. The grainy footage showed the general kneeling in front of the woman they had mocked just hours ago. She really was someone, he whispered. Jennings nodded. "She still is." The screen froze for a moment, capturing the image. An old hero in a tattered coat, and a general paying silent tribute. It would be the photo the world would soon see. And the beginning of the truth they could no longer ignore. The city didn't yet understand what was unfolding. But the first tremors had already shaken the ground. By the next morning, word had begun to spread. The surveillance photo of General Marcus Weller kneeling before an old woman in a worn military jacket had leaked online. At first, it appeared on a small veterans blog. Then a regional newspaper picked it up. Within hours, social media turned it viral. People were asking, who is she? Why did a 4-star general show her such respect? And what was that patch? At the precinct, chaos brewed. Reporters camped outside the doors. Officers who had left with Blake the day before now avoided eye contact. No one knew how to act, not with federal officials roaming the hallways and every phone ringing off the hook. Blake kept his head low. He hadn't slept. His mind replayed the moment again and again. The way she'd sat perfectly still, the expression that never cracked, and most of all, the patch he had mocked, now the center of a national mystery. Inside the captain's office, Sergeant Davis sat across from Weller, Hayes, and 2 men from Army Intelligence. Weller placed a file on the desk. Its cover was marked with a red stamp, Echo Hawk Restricted. The captain leaned forward. I thought the operation was classified. It still is, said Hayes. But given the leak, this woman's safety, and what she represents, we're preparing a limited disclosure. Davis raised an eyebrow. Limited disclosure? Weller's face was hard. We can't hide her anymore. She was left behind, betrayed. And now that she's surfaced, the people deserve to know the truth. Especially after how she was treated here. The captain swallowed. What is she, sir? Some kind of spy? Weller opened the file. A photograph slid across the desk. It was younger Maggie Ross, geared in tactical wear, eyes blazing with intensity. The photo looked like it came straight out of a classified movie poster. She was the operations and intelligence lead of Ghost Eagle Recon Unit, Weller said. One of the most elite teams we ever created. Their missions weren't just off the books. They were buried in black. Sergeant Davis stared at the image. But the records say they died in '93. Weller nodded. 8 of them did. Maggie didn't. The room went silent. She survived the ambush, the betrayal, and 3 weeks in hostile territory without backup, Weller continued. She was presumed Kia because no one wanted to answer hard questions about what happened. What did happen? Davis asked quietly. Weller's jaw clenched. We don't fully know. The mission was to recover a rogue informant suspected of leaking U.S. intel to foreign agents. But someone inside twisted the op. A false extraction code was given. No pickup, no cover. Ghost Eagle was left to die. Only Maggie made it back. Captain Reynolds leaned back, stunned. And instead of returning to command, she went silent, Weller said. I think she knew the truth would get her killed. So she disappeared. Back at the park, Maggie sat once again on the bench, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. She was no longer invisible. 2 uniformed officers stood nearby, this time not to watch her, but to protect her. They were silent, respectful. Civilians passed slower now, some taking quiet photos, others offering nods. No more mocking, no more laughter. Whispers followed her like shadows. That's her, they said. That's the ghost. But Maggie wasn't moved by fame or pity. She still clutched the old photograph in her pocket. The same 9 figures. The same bright smiles, now faded in memory. They were her team, her brothers and sisters. And they were gone. She heard footsteps behind her, heavier, deliberate. She knew who it was without looking. Morning, Captain, Weller said softly, sitting beside her. She gave a tired smile. You haven't called me that in 30 years. Feels good to say it again. For a while, they sat in silence, watching the world move around them. Then she spoke. I didn't want them to find me. I know, Weller replied. But now that they have. He turned. The Army wants to give you full reinstatement. With honors. We're also issuing public recognition for Ghost Eagle. I've already begun the paperwork. She didn't answer right away. Then, with a voice heavy from years of silence, she said, I don't want a medal. I want the truth told. I want the world to know they existed. Weller nodded solemnly. They will. And I want the names of those who betrayed us. He looked down. That might be harder. I'm not asking for revenge, she said. Just closure. The general took a deep breath. Then that's what you'll get. At the National Defense Archives, plans were being made. The declassified portion of Operation Echo Hawk would be announced at a press conference in 1 week. A special ceremony was scheduled at Arlington. Maggie Ross would be the guest of honor. A woman once mocked for her appearance was now hailed as a forgotten hero. As for Blake, he stood silently outside the park fence that afternoon, watching her. He didn't approach. He didn't say a word, but the shame in his eyes said everything. Maggie Ross never imagined herself under a spotlight again. The last time she had stood in front of a room full of uniforms, it had been a briefing before a mission that never came home. Now, 3 decades later, the Pentagon had arranged a formal event, a recognition ceremony for the Ghost Eagle unit. With Maggie as the sole surviving member, the media frenzy was building fast. Her image, the still frame from the park security cam, had now made it to national news. Headlines ranged from unknown hero revealed to forgotten soldier breaks silence after 30 years. Inside the Pentagon's main press room, Maggie sat behind a long oak table next to General Weller, a Defense Department official, and 2 other veterans from different eras. Microphones buzzed and cameras flashed. The patch on her worn jacket had been cleaned, but remained the same. A quiet testament to who she really was. Weller cleared his throat. Today, we honor the brave operatives of Ghost Eagle, a unit that never received the respect or recognition it earned. Until now. He turned slightly, gesturing to Maggie. Captain Margaret Ross led intelligence operations under the harshest and most secret conditions. She risked her life for this nation. And when she returned, we failed her. Silence blanketed the room. Then Maggie leaned toward the microphone. I didn't come here to be famous, she began, her voice calm but weighty. I came to speak. For those who can't. Reporters stopped typing. Even the photographers held their breath. For 30 years, she continued, I've carried their faces. I remember their laughter, their doubts, their bravery. We were sent into something we weren't supposed to survive. And when the storm hit and the sky went dark, we waited for help. It never came. Her hand, gnarled slightly from age and cold, rested on the table. They were more than soldiers. They were people. People who believed in what this flag stood for. They deserved better. A tear slipped down the cheek of one young officer standing in the back. Maggie nodded once. So, if you're asking what I want now, it's this, not medals. Not honors. I want the names of my team etched in stone. I want history to remember they existed. The room erupted in applause, but she remained still. Weller leaned over and whispered, That was perfect. Later that day, Maggie was escorted down the Pentagon's Hall of Honor. Along the hallway were bronze plaques etched with the names of decorated war heroes and fallen units. At the end of the corridor, a covered display stood, flanked by 2 silent guards. Weller stepped forward and gently pulled the cloth free. Beneath it was a sleek metal display, engraved with the Ghost Eagle insignia, the eagle with outstretched wings and twin lightning bolts. Below it 9 names. Maggie's was the last. The others were her team, her family. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, reaching into her pocket, she withdrew the old photograph, the one she had carried all these years. She placed it at the base of the plaque, letting the image of their young, smiling faces rest where they finally belonged. That night, back at her temporary housing near Arlington, Maggie sat quietly in her room. She stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur against the glass. Everything was different now, and yet everything still felt the same inside her. The military had offered her therapy, housing, even a security detail. She accepted none of it, save for one thing: access to classified archives. She wanted the truth about who had sabotaged the operation, who had cut off their communications, and why the mission had truly been buried. The next morning, she sat with Colonel Hayes in a restricted archive room. "There are redactions," Hayes warned. "But you'll get more than most." Maggie scanned the files. Code names, supply logs, communications intercepts, and then a memo marked "Top Secret, Eyes Only." Her blood went cold. The document confirmed her worst suspicions. The mission had been compromised from inside. A high-level operative had redirected the extraction team, not by accident, but by intent. Ghost Eagle had gotten too close to uncovering an unauthorized arms trade between American Black Ops contractors, foreign insurgents. Rather than risk exposure, someone had decided to eliminate the team, sacrifice them, erase them. Maggie closed the folder, heart pounding. "They covered it up," she whispered. Hayes said nothing. He had suspected this too. But seeing it on paper was something else. "They left us to die for politics." Maggie stood slowly. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't weeping. She was focused. "They're going to know," she said. "Everyone is going to know." By the following week, Maggie gave a second statement, this time to Congress. Her words didn't shake with nerves. Her gaze didn't falter. And as her testimony unfolded, a chilling account of betrayal, abandonment, and survival, the nation listened. The woman they had mocked was no longer silent. She was leading. She was exposing the rot they tried to bury. And through her, the names of the fallen echoed again. In the weeks following her explosive congressional testimony, Maggie Ross became a name spoken in reverence across the country. Veterans' halls reopened their dusty records. News outlets scrambled to piece together what had really happened in 1993. Across social media, the hashtag Ghost Eagle Truth went viral. What had started with a frayed jacket patch was now unraveling decades of silence, deception, and government evasion. But for Maggie, this wasn't about media. It was about memory and honor. Back at the Pentagon, General Weller was organizing a special task force, the Ghost Eagle Inquiry Board. For the first time, retired intelligence agents, mission handlers, and ex-operatives were being brought out of shadows to testify. Many had been waiting years for this day, afraid to speak, unsure if anyone would ever care. Weller placed Maggie at the heart of it. "You're the reason this is happening," he told her. "You don't just represent your team. You represent." Every voice that was silenced, Maggie simply nodded. She didn't need applause. She needed answers. The hearings began quietly, but gained momentum. Maggie sat through each one, front row, listening intently. Men and women stood before the board, with trembling hands and cracking voices, revealing secrets buried for decades. Ghost missions, off-book assignments, names erased from ledgers. Some testimonies matched what Maggie already knew. Others shocked her. One witness, a former intelligence analyst named Rachel Lang, revealed a communication intercept from 1993. It had been encrypted and flagged as a routing error, then disappeared. The contents? A message from Maggie's Ghost Eagle team calling for emergency extraction. Hours before they were declared Mia, "They knew you were alive," Rachel said, barely keeping her voice steady. "And they ignored it." The room fell completely. Silent, Maggie's fingers tightened into a fist. For years, she had blamed herself for the loss of her team, for surviving. Now that guilt was boiling into something else. Not rage, not revenge. Determination. Meanwhile, the country was changing its tune. Officer Blake, the same man who had laughed at her jacket in the park, appeared on live television. I mocked someone I didn't understand, he said, eyes red. What I did was shameful. I judged a book not just by its cover, but by the dirt on the cover. Maggie Ross showed me what true strength looks like, the public responded. Civilians sent letters. Schools began teaching Maggie's story as part of history modules. The Smithsonian reached out to ask if they could feature her jacket in a Women of Valor exhibit. Maggie declined. The jacket's not ready for glass, she told them. Not until the truth is complete. A month later, the Ghost Eagle Inquiry Board reached a critical breakthrough. Hidden among decades of shuffled archives, they uncovered a redacted order signed by an unidentified Pentagon official. It wasn't just that Maggie's team was abandoned. They were intentionally sacrificed to protect a black market weapons deal between rogue U.S. contractors and foreign buyers. Ghost Eagle had uncovered it too soon. Their deaths were deemed necessary fallout. Maggie stared at the page, heart pounding. There it is, she whispered. The betrayal, in black and white. General Weller put a hand on her shoulder. Now we expose it. The final board hearing was televised live. Millions tuned in. General Weller stood at the podium. Today, we bring closure to what was once invisible. Ghost Eagle was not a myth. It was real. Its members were heroes. And they were betrayed. He motioned toward Maggie, seated in the center. Captain Margaret Ross stood when the world forgot her. She honored the names no one else did. For that and everything she endured, the United States owes her its deepest debt. Applause echoed through the hall. Maggie slowly rose to her feet. I accept this recognition, she said, but not for me. For my team, for McCall, Sanders, Lee, Ortega, Choi, Reynolds, Davis, and Barnes. You left them behind. I never did. She paused, her voice steady. Now their names live again. Now they are seen. Outside the building, crowds had gathered. Veterans held candles. Students raised signs reading, Truth for Ghost Eagle. Maggie stepped outside and was met with cheers, salutes, and tears. An older woman approached her, clutching a photograph. My brother served with you, she said. We thought he was gone forever, forgotten. But now we know. Maggie nodded, her eyes soft. They were never forgotten, not by me. Weeks later, a quiet ceremony took place at Arlington National Cemetery. A new memorial was unveiled, a stone monument carved with the emblem of Ghost Eagle and the 9 names etched in clean, bold lettering. Maggie stood before it, wearing the same warm jacket. She reached forward, touched each name with her fingers, and whispered, You're home now. General Weller stood beside her, saluting. Behind them, hundreds stood in silent tribute. And on a nearby hill, where wind rustled the flags, an honor guard fired 3 rifle volleys into the air. Ghost Eagle had returned, not as ghosts, but as legends. The Ghost Eagle Inquiry Board's final report ignited a nationwide outcry. It named names, not all of them alive, but one stood out. Robert Kessler, a former Deputy Director of Defense Intelligence, had signed the redacted kill order in 1993. He had since retired quietly, receiving honors and teaching geopolitics at an elite university. His hands washed clean, but not anymore. The public wanted answers. Maggie wanted truth. Face to face. General Weller arranged a closed session. Maggie would finally confront the man whose pen turned her team into ghosts. In a sterile government chamber in D.C., the door creaked open. and Kessler walked in. Time had aged him, but his cold, calculating eyes hadn't changed. He looked across the room and froze when he saw her. Maggie Ross, standing tall in her worn jacket, arms crossed, eyes unblinking. He paused, then sneered faintly. "Captain Ross, I assumed you were dead." Maggie didn't flinch. "I was." "You signed the death certificate." Kessler sat unbothered. "I signed a strategic order in a time of chaos." Ghost Eagle walked into something it wasn't cleared for. "You were collateral." The words hit like ice. Maggie leaned forward slowly, her voice low but steady. "You left us in a hole while you covered your tracks. You erased my team like they were garbage." Kessler shrugged. "We were protecting national interests." General Weller interjected, voice tight with fury. "You mean arms deals with blacklisted clients? Smuggling weapons through proxy wars?" Kessler didn't deny it. "Sometimes we do things the public wouldn't understand to keep the machine running." Maggie stepped closer, eyes locked. "You didn't just betray us. You betrayed the flag you pretended to serve." Kessler finally shifted in his seat. "You're here now, Captain. Medals, memorials, a storybook ending." Her expression hardened. "They didn't get endings. Only graves without names." Weller dropped a final document on the table. "You're being referred to the attorney general for obstruction, conspiracy, and wartime misconduct. Charges are pending." Kessler's smug expression vanished. He stood, but Maggie blocked his exit. "I lived with silence for 30 years, she said, barely above a whisper. "You'll live with your name on every headline from here to West Point." She stepped aside, letting him pass. Kessler didn't. Look back. News broke within hours. Ghost Eagle betrayer identified. Former Pentagon official under investigation for wartime crimes. Maggie Ross forces reckoning in military scandal. The country roared. Protesters gathered outside Kessler's home. His honorary degrees were revoked. Veterans, once silenced, came forward with similar tales of betrayal buried in classified files. But Maggie didn't celebrate. She returned to her quiet apartment, took off her jacket, and placed it on her bed. She stared at the patch, running her fingers over its frayed edges. "You saw everything," she whispered. A week later, General Weller called. "We have one last thing." Maggie met him at Fort Bragg, where a special military tribunal was underway. There, a young cadet named Private Daniels stood at attention beside a podium. "We're reinstating the Ghost Eagle unit," Weller said. Maggie's eyes widened. "Why?" "Because the world still needs quiet guardians," he said. "But now they'll operate with the honor yours never received." He handed her a sealed case. Inside was a freshly sewn Ghost Eagle patch, modeled after hers, but with a new detail, 9 stars across the top. "For your team," he said. That evening, Maggie addressed the first class of new Ghost Eagle recruits. Her voice was clear, commanding, and laced with quiet pain. "You will train harder than anyone. You will operate in silence. And if ever you are asked to compromise your honor for convenience, remember the names of those who were once forgotten." She looked around at the young soldiers, each one standing because of the truth she had fought to bring back into the light. "You wear a legacy on your shoulder," she said. "Don't let anyone mock it or bury it." They saluted her in unison. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile. Later, Maggie stood alone on the Fort Bragg overlook. The sun dipped low, golden light casting long shadows on the tarmac. In her hand, she held the folded flag from the Arlington Memorial, given to her by Weller after the ceremony. She whispered the names again. Her team, her family. Then something moved behind her. Officer Blake. He had requested reassignment after the scandal and was now serving as a military police liaison. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "Not just for what you did, But for showing me who I want to be. Maggie nodded. Don't waste it. That night, in a small home on the edge of town, Maggie finally did something she hadn't done in years. She unpacked the old box hidden at the back of her closet. Inside were worn letters, a photo of her unit, a cracked compass, and a service pistol. She placed them all on the table, lit a candle, and sat beside it, not to mourn, not to remember, and to begin again. A year had passed since Maggie. Ross stepped out of the shadows and into history's light. The Ghost Eagle scandal had reshaped the narrative of American military service. Veterans across the country began speaking out about their own stories. Lost teams, black missions, and quiet sacrifices. Maggie's testimony was cited in Senate hearings, college lectures, and documentaries. She had become, unwillingly, a symbol, but she didn't want fame. She wanted truth to live longer than silence, and honor to speak louder than revenge. In Arlington National Cemetery, a new memorial had been erected. The Wall of the Unnamed, a granite arch engraved with 127 stars. Each star marked a soldier lost under classified circumstances, whose story had never made it home. At the center, a larger engraving read, dedicated to those who served in silence. Your names may be redacted, but your courage never was. And beneath it, one name finally carved in full. Captain Margaret ROSS Ghost Eagle, 1991 to 1993. During the unveiling ceremony, Maggie stood at the podium. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a worn photo. Her unit, smiling in the desert sun 3 days before they vanished. They were my family, she said. For decades, I carried their memories, stitched into this coat. When the world forgot them, this jacket remembered. A silence fell over the crowd. Veterans, officials, journalists, and families alike, each one drawn into the gravity of her voice. I was mocked for this jacket, she continued, but now it hangs beside medals in the National Archives. Not because it's pretty, but because truth doesn't always shine. Sometimes it limps home, ragged and quiet. Weeks later, Maggie was invited to a town hall event where young officers were awarded for leadership and integrity. One of them, a woman named Cadet Elena Rivera, approached her after the ceremony. You don't know me, Rivera said, but I grew up hearing your story. My dad was in Ghost Eagle training when the program was shut down. You gave our family a reason to speak again. She pulled back her sleeve slightly, revealing a stitched replica of the Ghost Eagle patch sewn inside her jacket. I wear it close, she said. Not for show, for strength. Maggie smiled. That's where it belongs. Despite offers from publishers and movie studios, Maggie declined every deal. She didn't want her story dramatized or rewritten. Instead, she chose a quieter legacy, mentoring young veterans returning from war, helping them process trauma and transition to peace. She rented a small office space in Virginia and called it Patchworks. The door read, We remember what the system forgets. Each veteran who walked in received a blank patch and a needle. They'd talk, share, cry, and stitch something of their own onto the fabric. Some stitched names. Others stitched dates. A few left them blank, just to hold. The wall behind her desk slowly filled with these patches, each one a memory made visible. On her 60th birthday, Maggie received a surprise visit. General Weller arrived, now fully retired and walking with a cane. Alongside him stood a group of decorated soldiers, each one from the first graduating class of the reinstated Ghost Eagle unit. They presented Maggie with a leather-bound book titled The Code of the Patch. Inside, each member had written a personal letter explaining what the patch meant to them. One read, I used to think heroes wore armor. Now I know they wear grief, silence, and jackets older than the wars they survived. Another, you taught U.S. that survival isn't just living through the fire, It's coming back to light a path for others. Maggie read every page with tears in her eyes. I never imagined this, she said quietly. General Weller smiled. None of us did. That's why it matters. As the sun set behind the Virginia hills, Maggie sat on her porch in silence. The worn jacket rested on her lap, its fabric soft but durable. A second skin that had weathered more than any metal ever could. She picked up a thread and needle. On the inside lining, she stitched something new. Just 2 words. I'm home. That night, a reporter asked her one final question during a quiet interview. What kept you going all those years? Maggie thought for a moment. She looked at the patch and back at the camera. I never stopped believing that even if the world forgets you, she said, the truth remembers. And with that, the story of a worn jacket, a silenced warrior, and a mocking laugh that turned into national redemption came to rest. But the legacy? It stitched itself into every shoulder. That carried courage quietly.